This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
This is a very special edition of Ask a Lawyer with Rabbi Shafir Lobb and Aaron Address.
Good morning and welcome, as Greg said, to this special edition of Ask a Lawyer. We are holding this special edition in memoriam of Stuart Address, and so we're going to be looking at what are his best moments. And as Greg mentioned, we also have Aaron, his son here, who obviously came in. For those who don't know, Stuart passed suddenly Monday evening at Cleveland Clinic Tradition Hospital with Lisa at his side. And we are all very saddened by that. His funeral was Wednesday at Rolling Oak, and our hearts go out to Stuart's family. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chaim, and we're hoping that somebody will call in with some memories of things that perhaps you heard Stuart say, some different things about him. The number is 772-340-1590, and this show is in his memory, dedicated to the best of Ask a Lawyer, the very, very best, in memoriam.
Aaron, if you want to get a little closer to the mic.
You've got to eat the mic.
Yeah. Boy, I remember the first time you came with your dad. You were really little. But you're now a wonderful shark down in South Florida, huh?
Yeah.
College time.
A lot less facial hair when you first met me.
What's it like down there in college?
It's pretty fun. I'm partying a lot. A lot of humidity, though, which sucks.
Yeah?
I went more into Florida weather than I ever wanted.
Well, hey, and you're a junior?
Yeah.
'Cause you did dual enrollment. Yeah, and I remembered seeing earlier this week as well some pictures. I guess you guys went to the Marlins game, huh?
Yeah, his first baseball game with me, major league game with me, and we got to see our favorite team win.
The Mets. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, if I had the pleasure of seeing Stuart in his office all the time, and of course he had all the Mets memorabilia there. It looked like a baseball Hall of Fame in your house.
There's more that no one else saw.
I'll bet. Yeah.
I would also, every Friday morning, if I wasn't working, the first thing I hear when I wake up is his voice on the radio.
Wait a minute. You woke up at 10 o'clock?
Yeah. When I could.
Oh, my. And there you go, Professor Lobb.
Yeah.
The view from a teenager.
Yeah. Absolutely. Totally understand.
Hopefully your students are awake during your class.
Mostly.
I've fallen asleep through one of my classes.
Oh, no. Uh-oh. True confessions. Look out.
Yeah.
Well,
It's, of course, it depends on because at Kaiser, the classes are very small. So falling asleep is painfully obvious. And
yes.
Not that it isn't obvious in the class of 40 or 50. It's still very obvious to the prof.
Wow. Yeah.
So is using their phones, their tablets, and iPads, right? They think the tablets and the laptops, rather. They think I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
We know you know, we just don't care.
That's probably true.
Oh, no.
That is probably true.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you mentioned during the ceremony the other day that Stuart was so involved in starting the temple.
Oh, absolutely. He was one of we. So we're coming up on our 8th High Holy Day season. This is just about the time we started August, the 1st of August, back in 2015, and Stuart was part of the board of what was then known as Eitz Chaim Community, ECC, and what Eitz Chaim Community, it was not a synagogue, it was what's called a chavurah, or just an informal group of friends.
Oh, okay.
And what we did, so it's a formal informal group of friends. So it had a board, it had...
so there's like a step before it becomes a synagogue?
It's just a social group.
Okay.
And what we did was that we had one Saturday a month where we did Havdalah, which is an end of Shabbat ritual. There's a beautiful little short service. We would do that. We would do some drumming and some chanting and things like that, and have a potluck dinner. And then on one Sunday a month, typically 2 weeks apart, so we'd split the month up, we would have a guest speaker in, again with a potluck dinner. And so it was this social thing that met twice a month. And we started out doing that in homes and just going from home to home to home, the group that wanted it. And Stuart was one of those. And we eventually got so big that we didn't fit in a house anymore, and we started renting the Holiday Inn over on Highway 1, and now we had to pay bills.
There you go.
Right. So, and we had people making donations, and so, we filed obviously as a nonprofit, because what we were really just doing was making enough money to pay for what we were doing, and,
sure,
and give a small honorarium to the speakers. And so when you do all that, right, then you have to have a board. And so Stuart was one of the 3 original board members, along with me, to create this space, this gathering space. We wanted to create a sacred spiritual space for people twice a month. And he was sitting with me when my contract was breached, and he looked up at me as we were processing that piece of information, because it came ironically from a member of the congregation saying, "Rabbi, just heard the news and I'm with you." Yeah, you're with me what? So it was kind of an interesting bit of a moment there. And
that almost sounds like a broadcast firing.
It almost, it was, and so
where somebody else tells you first.
And of course, Stuart, being a contract lawyer, among other things, looks up at me and says, "Well, there's no contract to violate. Why don't we start a synagogue?" And so I looked back at the board and I said, "Well, you don't just launch. You don't go from a group that meets twice a month for a social event to a synagogue. That takes a lot of work. Are we prepared to do that? Is it even possible?" And so that board spent a week to 10 days exploring that question. And we didn't have a lot of time if we were going to launch for the High Holy Days of that year. And came to the decision, now we can pull this off, we can do it. And so we held our first High Holy Day services at what was then the Town Square building, right, where
in tradition.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where a Lutheran church actually met. It's not, since they didn't sell the building, but tradition sold the building to the church that's in there now. But that's where we had held our first service, and right on the square. And we had over 100 people who came to that service. So
wow.
It was quite a launch. And of course, the congregation has grown and suffered from COVID and the lockdown and all of the other things that new congregations do. But Stuart was our founding president. When we applied for membership, this is kind of an interesting thing. When we first formed, it's not a Florida law that you have a president. You have to have a secretary-treasurer, and you have to have a board, but you do not have to have a president. You have to have a legal agent, and he was that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, he was the legal agent. And then when we filed for membership with URJ, because we're dual membership, we're a membership with all of the Alliance for Jewish Renewal and with URJ. And when we did, Olive didn't care, but URJ wanted a president because they wanted somebody to be part of the president's circle. And so Stuart became that founding president. And we received our charter from URJ. It hangs beautifully in the sanctuary. And, so yeah, he was a big part of that. And then when he handed the reins to Patty Hinckley, who was our second president, he became our historian because he has such a way with videos and he loved to take pictures.
Yeah, now I have about 100,000 photos to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll bet. Yeah.
Where most people might take 2 or 3, Stuart would take 200 or 300.
Especially of you sleeping.
Well, that would be you, not me. You're a little more of an interesting topic that way.
Well, in the story with you two comes with the start of the temple as well, because he was just becoming a teenager.
Yes, he was. He was one of our first B'nai Mitzvah and called to Torah. And we did that over at the Civic Center.
Your first postponement, too.
My first postponement in Port St. Lucie. Yeah. Not my first postponement. So that was one of Aaron's growth moments, was this meeting at Estella's Pizza. I even remember it at the... Because we had threatened him that if he didn't buckle down and start studying, the bar mitzvah was not going to happen in time. Now, actually, that's...
Okay,
you're not...
explain the time factor. I
Okay,
don't
so it takes
it.
a good... at least a year of very serious study, and typically 2 years. And actually, no, you're not the first postponement. The other postponement didn't finish up. She stopped. Yeah, it was one who was going to be together with Karen, and she didn't hit a milestone either. And this is my rule. You miss a certain number of milestones, and then we move out the date so that you can meet those milestones. It's nothing. It's not punitive. It's just that's the way it is. You can't get there from here. It's like if I didn't leave my house until 10 minutes before the show, I wouldn't make it here. There's a certain amount of distance you got to travel to get to the end goal. And so, So we had that meeting over a pizza, which is always what we had at Estella's. And Aaron was informed that his bar mitzvah date was moved and no longer going to be just by his birthday.
Uh-oh.
It was by what was supposed to be my birthday.
Yeah, if he had gone to term. Maybe there's a certain justice in that. I don't know. The other thing about Stuart is Stuart's the reason why there is an Ask the Rabbi show. He lobbied for that long and hard and very intently. And we're a small congregation. Dollars are not easy to come by. So, that's why I'm always asking for sponsors for Ask a Rabbi, because we are a small congregation and we need the help to keep me on the air. But he lobbied for it long and hard, and he had me on a couple of Ask the Lawyer segments
I remember.
To convince me that it was indeed the way to go and powerful. And here we are, years later. I don't know how many years there's been Ask a Lawyer, but I know that
I think we were going into year 6?
I believe it. I mean, it was. Yeah. It wasn't long after we had started the synagogue, and because I remember we entertained. Somebody had come to us. One of the advertising sales folks had come to us and talked about the idea of doing a show. I remember having that discussion at our California campus, which was our second real location.
Right across from the Mets, yeah.
Before we moved in with the Mets.
Yeah.
That's where we are now. That's
Across
our
from the
third.
pizza place.
Yeah, that was in the same shopping center as Estella's, across the aisle, across the hallway or whatever that alcove.
Across the junk room.
Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a church that meets in there where we had been.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Wow.
So there's definitely all kinds of memories, and that's why when we had first talked about doing this special memorial service, and again, an invitation to anyone, please call in. Tell us what little tidbits Stuart gave to you, what your favorite moments were with him, and you're probably looking for it on his website. I did tag him, so it should show up on his as well. 772-340-1590. And my camera is hardwired to put it up on Facebook at the temple. So I'm sure people are wondering why there's Ask a Lawyer on the temple site, but we're trying to figure out how to get it. As I said, I tagged him, so it should go over to his site.
There you go.
So, yeah, memories and memories and more memories, but definitely, and I know that Stuart never planned to be, it wasn't on his bucket list to be the president of a congregation. But I think this might be as good a place as any. The service the service was almost sunny until it wasn't.
The second I start speaking,
Yeah, well, you know.
he made himself known.
Yes. And so I'm going to invite you, actually. Go ahead and get your talk out, because Aaron gave a small talk at his father's.
Stuart talk.
That's true.
And I've got to tell you that in the tradition of WPSL and WSTU, this happened when our Tom Teeter, our esteemed news director at WSTU, passed, and some very strange technical problems happened this last Wednesday. And we went off the air. We had a power glitch, and and then back on quickly, relatively quickly.
Just enough to put a thumb on it.
But it was just enough, and I'm saying, Stuart, you did that. You did that. Oh, my. Yeah, but go ahead.
So I'm going to shift the camera. This is one of the beauties of this. So there you go. People can see you now.
To my dad, for the longest time, I thought I didn't feel emotion or could just turn it off and not feel anything, but I can't. I'm scared and I'm lost and I need my dad. You were the only person that I always knew was there for me when I went to bed and when I woke up the next day. No matter how angry or upset I was with you, I knew you loved me. We had a lot of fights and a lot of struggles. I know I hurt you and scared you a lot, and I know you still loved me. I wasn't the perfect kid. I always put up a fight, and I always had something to say. That's because I'm yours. I thought about this day a lot, sadly, but I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't know I could hurt like this, and I've struggled a lot, and there have been many times I just want to freeze time and go back again, but none more than this time. You were supposed to see me become my own person. You were supposed to see me have children and spoil them so they could give me hell like your parents did to you. Since I knew I wanted to go to med school, I knew I needed my dad to give me my white coat, and I knew you'd find a way to do it, even though you couldn't stand or walk for very long. You were supposed to be there at least until I figured some shit out. I don't know anything, and I just started my life, and I miss you. I always thought I love you and I miss you were just things we said as a formality or as a way of being polite and showing we cared, but I didn't realize what they actually meant until now. Even though I hate this so much, I'm glad my last memory will always be you taking me to my very first Major League game, and that's winning a game that meant so much. I'm glad I got to laugh and joke around with you and call you a weirdo one last time. I know there were many times you felt as if you were failing or did fail as a parent. I know you hated it when you couldn't help me through stuff, but you didn't fail and you made me the person I am. We had our rough times, but you were a great parent. You constantly said that when you were on your deathbed, you just wanted to know I was a good person, and I hope you knew how much I was trying. I know you'll give me guidance still, but it's not in the way I wanted and needed it to be. You said I'd missed those yes or no questions that turned into 5-hour-long lectures about the Cold War or politics. or didn't know I'd miss it yet. I couldn't wait to call you after my Supreme Court class and talk to you about the very same things you learned in law school, even though that too would become one of your lectures. I wish you could still be here to get tired of going on after you could finally tell I lost interest in our conversation. I wish I had you to talk about school and life and everything, and I wish I could have learned to open up more to you and let you in more than I had. Thank you for teaching me everything I know and making sure I understood life and making sure I got an education, fighting for me to keep me in school when I screwed up and being there when I needed some extra help. A lot of dads give up and a lot don't care when they get divorced, but you wanted me and you took me. You took me and loved me when it felt like no one wanted to and when it felt like the world hated me with everything it had. I know it was hard seeing who I was becoming as a kid, and I know I threw you for a lot of loops. But you stood by my side no matter how much you didn't understand or want to be true, and you were there. Dad, I miss you, I love you, and I just want my crazy hairy gorilla of a dad back no matter how annoying you get.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a saying in Judaism: when somebody passes, we add. In English, it usually becomes a Z and an L, but it's a Zion and a Lamed, and it stands. It's an abbreviation for Zichrono Livracha. May his memory be a blessing, and that is, in fact, what we truly hope. I'm rolling this the wrong way. You would think that after all these years, I would not get my right and left backwards, but I still do.
Hey, I know the feeling. Well, looking at your Lincoln Park days, I know your dad was so proud of your debate team.
Oh, yeah.
He constantly talked about that.
When we'd hang around, when he'd stay through my show, and we'd talk afterward, then it was almost always about debate at LPA. He was so proud when you got into LPA. He was busting his buttons.
Then he was so upset when I almost ruined that.
You have no idea.
But you prevailed.
They both did.
Yeah.
And, so the rabbi's perspective in something like this is kind of, it's an interesting piece because it's one of the longest relationships that I have here in Port St. Lucie. And you know that I still have relationships with folks back in Tucson. I don't give up relationships easily when they're formed well. And Stuart's was one that was formed well. It's not to say that he didn't have his challenging, rough moments, many of which were about you.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
From misbehaving at Sunday or Hebrew school. But, you expect some of that, but you definitely have the...
I proved to you could make it through anything.
There's that's one way to look at it. And, and your dad was there. When he said he would be there and do something, he would be there and do something, even if it was difficult for him. And that's not true with a lot of people. A lot of people will say, I'll be there, I'll help you, and then you come to do it, and there's nobody looking back at you. Now, as Aaron said, there were many things that Stuart couldn't do as he got older. His health, he did suffer, and he was on that scooter more and less able to get up and move around. So there was less that he could physically do, but he still always had an opinion.
You think?
Yeah. And not shy about letting you know what it was, and he was not afraid to challenge me, which, to learn how to challenge a rabbi is a good skill. And I invite people to have it, not just with rabbis, but with anybody that you're working with that that deserves respect, whether or not, and it's something that he and I actually talked about. For example, it's well known that he was not a fan of President Trump, and that's putting it mildly. But he always had respect for the office. And, we had this discussion. what would you do as president of the congregation if President Trump came to visit? And he said, I would be appropriately respectful of the office. So it's an interesting, that's some of the dialogue that we had.
That's intriguing. Yeah.
Right. He would have respect for the office. The man was elected, and absolutely legally, because the Electoral College is what elects our presidents, folks. And so the election of President Trump was absolutely according to the laws and regulations of the country, as was President Biden's 4 years later. And not to get into the heavy politics that Stuart always took a deep dive. We had some of the times I don't discuss politics in the service, and I can talk about issues, but not people. And we tried to curb some of it in the refreshments afterward. And for some people, we had another gentleman in the congregation, our musician, Reverend Jack Kirch, and he was a very staunch Trump supporter, and there was Stuart, who was a very strong, in those days, Hillary Clinton fan, and the two of them would, every once in a while, get into it over the refreshments after the service. And there was more than once I had to tamp both of them down. And we've actually lost both of them. This is just about the anniversary of Jack's death, so I'm sure that they're bending God's ear right now with these long debates.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's it was always a challenge to keep politics out with the two of them, because they were so strongly in their camps.
Well, I know the one thing that Stuart had mentioned on the air, Aaron, was the fact that he was really concerned about your generation.
Constantly, and he kept telling me to look at the news, but when you're around it literally 24/7, it kind of, you go numb. But he would always have the news on because he was scared, because he saw things taking a certain turn he didn't like.
Yeah.
You talked about your Supreme Court class, was it?
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Well, it's about...
He's still in it.
Yeah, I'm still in it.
Okay.
I'm taking it right now. But it's about the Warren Court, which is the first court he learned about in law school, because it had just ended.
Our old governor of California. Yeah, Earl Warren. Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the times, because right now we're talking about Brown and Board of Education, we were talking about, separate but equal. And he and I had a whole hour-long conversation about what that actually means. Is it fair? Is it not? And everything he could think of to try to show me how the world actually is from a legal perspective.
Yeah. That sounds like him.
Yeah. And so other life events that have happened recently was that Stuart and Lisa, the love of his life, were joined in marriage just the end of December. And that was actually kind of interesting, because they had put off the date because of COVID, because it just, first there was nobody had the vaccines, and we didn't really understand how the disease transmitted. We did and we didn't. And we've learned since that there's a lot of things you can do to keep yourself safer, and certain things that really expose you. But in any event, they ended up getting married, and it was a beautiful, beautiful sight, a beautiful, beautiful beach just north of here. And they were originally going to get married in January of this year, January of 2022. And the idea was that they were going to go on a cruise for their honeymoon right afterward. And because of COVID, the cruise was canceled. And so I looked at them and I said, you really might want to get married a week or two earlier, because that way you'll be in 2021. And so they did. They moved it up to the 27th of December. And then both Lisa's and Stuart's families came together and became, and it wasn't a large wedding, in part because of COVID, but it was a very beautiful wedding. And, and I remember Stuart practicing standing in the temple.
I saw him dance for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, he did the
Really?
dance. He danced with Lisa at his wedding.
And so I know he's
Yeah,
constantly having
He was
problems.
complaining for a few weeks after.
Yeah,
But he did do it.
he pushed himself, as he typically did, to accomplish what he intended, which was to walk and to be with her. He walked down the aisle. And not that was easy, because he was in and around on his scooter, and we convinced him finally to get on his scooter at the wedding and said, you don't need to turn this into a double life event. And, so he was able to do most of the things that one would do at a wedding. And it was a beautiful wedding. Small, I take that back. Medium size, because neither family is tiny. And there was just this big crowd of Lisa and Stuart's family. And the kids' table. And the kids are not kids anymore. But
Yeah.
No.
Hardly.
no,
And
not
then
at
I
all.
proceeded to give him a speech longer than he had, which is a first.
Well, okay.
That's not a skill you need to cultivate as much as you're trying to. I'll give you the words of my father. And one of the things that I've shared with Aaron was that I lost my father at about the same age that Aaron is. Now, my dad died at 53, also very suddenly. My father had been visiting a patient in the hospital and said, I don't feel so good. And went down to the ER because he was in the hospital, and they admitted him. And he was actually out of the hospital for Shabbat. They let him out Friday, and he was supposed to go to a different hospital to get a dye test. So this parallel may surprise you too. The hospital where he was at, the machine was broken that did the dye tests, and they were awaiting a part from Germany. And so they had made an appointment for him Tuesday to go to this other hospital and have an angiogram. And he died that morning, Tuesday morning.
Wow.
He died at home. He started seizing, and we got the ambulance. And much like with your dad, they worked on him, and it wasn't successful. And so, yeah, very quick for me as well. And the only difference was that I was in the house at the time when it happened. I happened to have been visiting. I was in college as well. So, yeah.
Never easy.
No, it never is. And, yeah, I didn't mean to go that place.
No, I know what you're saying. It's so weird. My dad was having a tough time getting around, and we had moved him down to San Diego, which is where Carol and I were working. And then I got a job at ESPN. And so I was gone, and it was his birthday, the end of January of 1980. And he called Carol. He said, I really don't feel too well. Can you take me to the doctor? And by the time she got there from where we lived, which was about 20 minutes, he was gone.
Wow.
And of course, I was 3,000 miles away.
Yeah.
But it's never easy.
No, it never is. And when it's sudden, when somebody falls really ill, and like a cancer diagnosis or any of the other terminal diseases, or diseases that can be terminal. Cancer is not always terminal. In fact, there are many people living who've either conquered cancer or they're in remission. And but when it happens suddenly, you don't have any of that build-up, or you know it's going to happen, but you don't expect it when it happens.
Right.
Right. And so that's obviously part of what's going on here in the processing of it. And it's one of the reasons we wanted to let his listeners to know that we have this special show for his memory. He was no small individual, but he also was huge by his impact, his caring, his heart. And I'm not going to say he was the easiest person to deal with, because he definitely was. When he believed he was right, he was adamant about being right.
You have no clue.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And
spoken like a true son.
Yeah. I have heard once or twice from him. If I had known before the argument what I know now, it would have gone differently. But even that, to admit that is a huge step. There are many, many people who can't even recognize it after the fact, that they didn't have all the information. It's not that he was wrong. It's to say he didn't have all the information. He was operating on partial information. And don't we always all work on partial information in reality? We never have the whole story. And that's one of my constant themes as a rabbi and as a professor, which is that critical thinking, the ability to have an open mind, is to recognize that we don't have all the story. We don't have all the details, ever. And there might be some piece of information that might appear small and insignificant, but in fact is significant.
The one thing that impressed me about Stuart, just listening to him discuss cases, were his investigative skills.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a tireless investigator. When he got his hands on a case,
Oh, yeah.
it was 100%.
And he was all through the internet, constantly mining stuff and looking for stuff.
That sucks when you're his kid and in trouble.
I don't think either of you had very many secrets from the other. A little bit there, but
I think he had less secrets than I did to him.
okay. Now that's a normal parent-child relationship.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, actually, we talked about that. Never mind. So it's kind of an ironic. I'm so glad for the memories that I have with Stuart. And Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing. I know that it is for me. My life would have been different had Stuart not been in it. Very different. There wouldn't be this rate. I probably wouldn't be in Port St. Lucie if it weren't for Stuart. So, very, very big. And his the house that he lives in now is the second house that he's lived in the time that I've known him, but it's actually not all that far from where I live. And there were times that we would meet, and I've met with Aaron over a Burger King, whatever we want to call that. But
Have asked a rabbi in person.
yeah.
Yeah, you didn't
Yeah.
have to wait every week, right?
No, actually, and he's got a very unique moniker on his texts, so it's not hard to spot him when he texts. But it's something that I'm pleased that I've had this relationship with you, and I know that he's proud. I know that he's proud of what you're becoming. We're all in the act of becoming. Although Jewishly we say that at the point of one's death is where we have the real measure of how they live their life. Because until that very last moment, you can change. You can become horribly wicked, or you can become horribly good. Or incredibly good. Horribly is probably not the right adjective for that. And there's a story in Talmud of somebody who had been really just an absolute scoundrel his whole life. And in the moments before his death, he has a heart-to-heart with God and changes. And he's actually running from where he is to the synagogue in that aha moment when he slips and falls and dies. And the story in Talmud says, and a voice from heaven called out, "Rabbi," in that moment. And all the other rabbis are upset because it takes years and years of study to become a rabbi, and here this individual. And it says that God judges us at the time of our death for the sum total. And, we're perfectly human. And how do you balance the events of your life? And I take from that story that we can always make a shift toward the good as long as we're still breathing. And that's what's going to matter, is where we go with it. How do we take all these things that make up a life like Stuart's? It was not easy for Stuart as a young man to make it through law school. But it was a dream that he had. And I know that he shared with Aaron many, many times he owes a big part of that to debate. If he hadn't been active in his speech and debate class.
That's what made him want to do it.
Right.
Then his father didn't think he could do it,
so
he did it.
So he did it.
Just like I did with Iris.
Well, yeah.
I pulled at him and went through without him knowing.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and so he finished it, and you probably couldn't contain the smile on Stuart's face when Aaron completed his AA in psychology at IRSC. Never had you in a class, though.
No.
No.
I did that on purpose.
Okay, that's fine. I think that's
You'd seen enough of you at the temple. Oh.
Well, he was probably afraid I'd grade him the way he really needed to be.
Yeah. I knew I couldn't slack.
There you go.
Yeah. Aaron is gifted with one of those memories where he doesn't have to read things too many times to retain it.
Oh, that is special.
I've been yelled at by a few teachers for that.
That is very that is a wonderful gift.
And I have to say that there was, I can remember having a discussion saying I accidentally ended up with 2 textbooks of this kind or that kind for various reasons, and there was always this hand up saying, "May I have that extra textbook?" And this is before he went to IRSC.
I still have the
I know you do.
textbook.
I know you do. That's okay. You're welcome to keep them. The textbooks have moved on, as they do. Psychology is a field, so we actually share that. He's going into psychology, and I don't know if you're going to go on to psychiatry or
neurology.
Neurology. Okay, neuropsychology, and that's not my specialty. My specialty is other things, but yeah. So
well, you can work on that and get another PhD.
No.
How to deal with childhood, Aaron? That's your specialty.
That was that was a specialty, and I will say that there may have been times that I wondered, but I'm seeing you mature into a wonderful human being and contributing. I expect that there'll be a lot of contributions to society, some of which I hope you'll do b'shem, in the name of your father. So. Yeah. So, folks, you haven't called in, and that might be because I don't know how it's showing up on Stuart's Facebook page. I know it doesn't send out the notices that would have normally gone, but this show has been and continues to be in Stuart's memory. It's a memorial service of the very best of the best of Ask a Lawyer. And I know that occasionally I even called in on my way into the studio to discuss something with him, and he, of course, recognized my voice. So,
the service itself, I thought, was fascinating. Never been to one, and I guess if you want to say so down to earth.
It's a very organic. Judaism's a very organic. It's an old religion. And so the rituals and the traditions are things that they may not have been psychologists and they may not have been this or that, but they certainly knew what helped people move forward.
Which is why you made me do certain things.
Yeah.
I really didn't want to do.
You got it. And, so my psychology and my professoring, I make verbs out of everything, comes out of that tradition. Out of that really steeped understanding that there is a ton of psychology in Judaism. Jewish funerals are in your face. We do not sugarcoat any parts of it. You know, the funeral. There's two objectives in the funeral. One is to see the person put to their resting place, to be contributing back to the earth, to let your molecules remingle with the system. And so it's designed to facilitate that. We don't embalm. We don't, we make sure that the grave is covered, and there are certain prayers that are said once that happens. But the second that the burial part is done, the shift immediately within the second is back to the family, because those are the folks that are hurting. The deceased is no longer hurting.
And in Stuart's case, that is probably ultimate blessing.
Oh, absolutely.
This has been a wicked few years for him.
It has been, So one of the lines, and you're holding the service, I can see it over there by your mic. There's a line in there that says, some deaths are more peace-giving than others. And that is a reference to knowing that the immense pain that Stuart had been in those last few years is now done.
By the way, did you ever get the candles lit in the rainstorm?
No, the candles were to go home. They get lit.
There you go. Okay.
They're lit in the mourner's home, and I haven't been in since you got the candles, so
I've been walking her through that.
Okay. So
I've got to ask you about the shovels. The first shovel
upside down.
Upside down. What is the?
So each family member and community member is invited to put at least three shovels of dirt on the gravesite, because we've got to cover the grave in order to say those final prayers. And the first one is done upside down because it's not easy to grieve. It's not easy to lose somebody. And it's not easy to lose somebody that you can't stand, let alone somebody that you're fond of or love. And so you do it upside down to signify how hard it is to do it, to recognize that this is not an easy thing to do for anybody. Family members more so, obviously, and loved ones. But friends and even people who barely knew you in the community, it's not easy. It's not easy to lose somebody like Stuart. It's a big part of the community. And the second two shovels, of course, are right side up, because if we did them all upside down, we'd still be trying to cover his body.
We'd still be there. Yeah.
And so we're practical. And I know that you saw at the funeral were a couple of the strong men, strong people. Sometimes it's not men. It depends on who's strong in the community. And I've often done I did a few shovels extra. And Aaron came up and did a few extra.
Oh, yeah, he did. Yep.
And a shout out to Jim, who came up and did it. And I'm trying to remember who took the shovel from you.
Jim.
Jim? Ah, okay. I thought he was on my side. Oh, well.
Who took it from me?
Okay. He may have gone round and taken it from you. Yeah. And so, different people pitched in to cover and make sure, because it's one of... I'm this interesting blend of tradition and modern sensibility in as far as things like that. So the body needs to be completely covered. So the funeral homes in the area are used to me. They know to have a big pile of dirt at graveside, because we're going to put a good chunk of it into the graveside. And we don't just do a token couple of tosses and call it done. Because that is the tradition. It is to be back into the elements. And it's never easy. It's never easy. So, yeah. So we hope that Stuart is at rest at this point. I'm sure he's looking down, probably growling a little bit at me, probably wondering where some of his callers are, folks. 772-340-1590 as we come up on the last few minutes of this special edition.
I don't think they wanted to break in.
In memories. That might be. and we'll be moving forward. And in a few minutes, we'll do a little bit of a special. We'll talk about a little bit about grief and lifetimes and things like that, and obviously dedicate the Ask a Rabbi to Stuart as well. So, yeah. It's not easy. And so, yeah, you have the service there. I craft a unique service for each individual. And as you can tell, there's pictures there, and you can see on his face how happy he is with Lisa. He was truly happy too. And they did get to go on one cruise. They got one part of their honeymoon. They had a 2-part honeymoon planned. Part 1 happened, and part 2 will live in their hearts.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any last words that you want to say as part of this episode?
Not really.
Okay. I what I can tell you from experience is that even though you feel like you're here and not here, you're more not here than here. And you'll unpack and process it over the years to come. And may you have many, many more years. And as you and I said, may you take care of yourself. And may there be a lesson to all of us to take care of ourselves as much as we can so that we can spend as much time with our loved ones. And be in good health while we're doing it.
Yes.
And I know that COVID, I'm pretty sure that the COVID lockdown did not help him in many, many ways, as it's not helped many people. The social isolation that occurred over the pandemic shutdown, damaged a lot of people. We're going to unpack that for a while. So that's just one of those things. So I'm sure that was a contributor, because it certainly didn't have him going out of the house anywhere near what he liked to do. Going out for dinner was one of Stuart's great joys, even though the cuisine was typically limited. Love that pizza.
At one point, it was 6 times a week.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. Well, just a message to Stuart.
Okay.
The WPSL chocolate bar is going to Aaron this year.
Okay.
I can finally take it.
I think that's a fair thing. That chocolate bar. He definitely talked about it quite a while. And
Yes.
in fact, I took his chocolate bar to his wedding for him. So this has been a special episode of Ask a Lawyer in memory of the one and only Stuart M. Address, Esquire. Stuart Address Law. Ask a Lawyer. Thank you for being here.
WPSL, Port St. Lucie. WSTU, Stuart.